Hey guys, it's Kate, and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. I'm here with a kind of weird watercolor. So if you want to stick around and watch this little time lapse, we can kind of hang out. So I did kind of an intuitive watercolor. So I started out with a sort of quick quick pencil sketch, and very loosely in the back of my mind somewhere I thought, it might be pretty cool to do sort of a abstracty kind of weird landscape. And so that really was my whole thought process going into this. And as you know, if you do watercolor, it is extremely hard to layer if you don't start with a plan. But that said, I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. I just kind of kept plugging away at it, and it ended up being a really fun little painting. So I have my Mei Liang palette, which I've just been happen to be using lately, and that Bao Hong watercolor paper. So I'm sort of doing some hills, and I'm working wet and wet. I sprayed down my paper so everything is just kind of blending together with kind of a very loose structure. And I'm just sort of playing around with color. I'm adding more stripes and just really loving how the colors are sort of blending together. And I'm just sort of going through and trying to get out of my comfort zone a little bit and just blend some color together. Now, in some ways, that's really fun and really satisfying, especially when you can see the little wispy pieces of watercolor paint kind of wick away and go into other puddles. But also, if you are working with watercolor, because of its transparency, all your previous layers will show through. So it's something of a challenge to work with if you are just sort of going willy-nilly with color. So that's kind of what happened here. But right now, I just got done going through with my palette knife and making some scratch marks, and you won't really see too much until we do the close-up, but what that basically does is allows your paint to kind of sink into those creases and you get some dark lines. It's a really great way to do grasses and things like that if you're doing a real landscape, but for this one I just kind of wanted some extra texture, and I started off doing some little quick, flicks for some grasses, but then I ended up just, drawing lines into the whole paper. So you can kind of see some swirly marks later. But I just ended up doing glaze layer after glaze layer and trying different colors, but I kind of stayed within the same scheme, at least for now. And I'm adding some extra details, some more saturation and some spots, and kind of following those original lines that I had put down. And then I'm just sort of slowly adding to it. And then there I grabbed the Payne's Gray, and I thought, ooh, what a nice pop of contrast, that dark over light. So I started to add that in. And as I'm going along, I'm just sort of lost on what I really want to do. So I just figured, well, I'm recording anyway. I will just keep going and play with these colors. And so that's what I did. And, I had some sort of natural openings that presented an opportunity later, like that sort of white spot in the upper left-hand side. But right now I'm just embracing more of those flowy lines, and I decided to add a lot more. So I grabbed some blue, and I wanted to just go through there and add the lines and just add some more texture, more contrast to the painting. And I wanted to work with a very colorful palette, but I wanted to make sure I got the different colors in different areas of the paper. So I am sort of experimenting with adding some more brightness, and you can kind of see that green color I'm putting on now is actually mirrored in that very bottom layer, although you can't see it that well. And then I'm going into the yellow ochre and some of those other previous colors, but I am layering it on the sort of mismatched hills so that we can get a pretty good variety of color going on. And it's sort of getting this kind of surreal look. It's definitely not a realistic landscape, but it was really a lot of fun to do. And now here's where I just threw caution to the wind and I'm going in with that red. And it just adds that pop of warmth and brightness. And I ended up really liking that too. So it really just became a journey to see where this would take me. And I mean, at this point I was like, well, if the painting's ruined, I guess it doesn't really matter. So I'll just have some fun with it and keep putting down some marks and paint. And who knew I would actually like the final result? So even as busy and kind of messy as it is, I ended up really liking this one. So I kind of started looking at that white spot and I thought, that would be a really great spot for a little sunrise. And so I decided to just put in that big giant sun right there where there's no other paint layers. And I wanted to get it really deep and bright and really kind of pop out from the page. And then I wanted to really pump up those sun rays. So I got some more of that and made sort of a glaze layer with, obviously artificial looking sun rays, but just drawing more and more attention to that sun. And kind of by accident, that sort of red line right below the sun that kind of ends where it begins, that actually wasn't on purpose, but it's just sort of another thing pointing at the sun, which ends up being my focal point for this. So I'm just getting those rays in there, making sure that it really stands out from the rest. And I end up adding a little bit more later too. But for right now, I'm just kind of letting that dry after I get my final little layer on there, adding a little bit of that orangish color. And then I'm going to add a little bit of that warmth down into the hills below. So where the sun might shine on the top of a hill, I'm adding some of that sort of orange yellow. And I don't remember the exact color I got, but I want to say it's probably cad yellow and orange yellow from the palette. That looks like it was the colors that I used. I've got my little swatch sheet sitting next to me. So, and then what's a landscape if it doesn't have any trees? So of course I had to add some of those. So I grabbed my Payne's Gray and I ended up grabbing a little bit of green later. And I'm just putting in some very sort of whimsical trees, just so it makes it a little bit more of a complete painting, at least to me. So I'm kind of going through looking for some opportunities to put a happy little tree, as Bob Ross would say. And then I think to myself, well, maybe I should put in a shrub or two so we have some things of different sizes in that foreground. So I end up putting in some little bushes and such. And I was kind of excited while I was painting. And so you can see those trees over sort of on the left-hand side. That part of the paper wasn't completely dry yet because I had just gone through with a stroke of paint not too long before. So I ended up going back over that again later after it had dried, and I just enlarged it a little bit to kind of make it a nice solid shape like the other ones so that they would be similar to each other. But in the meantime, I went ahead and added those darker stripes to the sun, and that makes it pop out even more. And then I am adding some of those little tree shapes and bush shapes to the background with a little bit of a lighter color so they kind of fade away as you get further into the distance. And then they're also, a little bit smaller, but it sort of gives that impression that there's just lots of hills in the background and they're just dotted with trees and bushes, and they get smaller the further back you go. So now I'm in there just doing some final fixes on my trees, and I wanted to make these really nice and dark and fill them in with that dark color. So I've got kind of a mixture of green, and I want to say I probably used Hooker's green for this. That's what it looks like to me. And I mixed that with Payne's Gray to get a nice dark layer so that they would be pretty opaque on the page and not really show too much of the background through there. But this was just really a lot of fun to do. And as I'm going in through my finishing touches, and I'm kind of looking at this while I do my voiceover, And I just kind of remembered how much fun it was. So sometimes you just have to get out of your comfort zone and just play with the paint. And even if you don't like how it turns out at the end, you can really find some good opportunities to learn techniques that you like, or color combinations that you like, or anything like that. So I'm going to give you the close-up of the painting so you can see all those layers and where I kind of scratched in the paper with my palette knife. But if nothing else, I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me for a few minutes today, watching some paint, or just had me playing while you painted. But thank you so much for being here, and until next time, keep creating.